Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Maiden.
But what's more impressive to me about the
Chase Thornton.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase.
And Adam.
No,
LaRue.
not necessarily, but it's again the same.
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
Oh my gosh, we're finally back on our normally scheduled night, almost a little 10-minute delay there. We're finally back on Wednesday night here with Operation Domination on the Fantasy Football Advice Network. If you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification because we always have new content for you every single day, from Operation Domination to Fantasy Forecast to Too Much Best Ball and a bunch of other shows in between. We got the NFC South we're going to be talking about today, a big division that could be looking a hell of a lot better, not just from a fantasy standpoint, from an NFL standpoint as well this season. So a lot to dive into. It's a condensed house. We don't have Adam with us. We didn't have a guest for this show. It's just going to be the three amigos diving deep into all the players that we want to talk about today. So Chase, Chris, are you ready?
Absolutely. I'm excited. I'm getting a little more time to talk about some of this in more depth. Just, exciting division, I think, Dan. A division that's going to be ready to toss up division, fantasy football, and for football on the field as well.
A lot of offensive changes in this division for this year. So yeah, there's a lot to look into and a lot of prognosticating that has to happen here. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
And maybe even more exciting, a lot of crap defenses. So maybe we get some more shootouts in this division as well, which could also play out to our fantasy football hopes and dreams. All right, let's get into it. Talk about the quarterbacks right off the rip. Kirk Cousins coming in here. He is the top-rated quarterback of this division. I was saying this right before we went on the show. As excited as we are from a redraft typical 12-man league, one quarterback type league, which is still the standard pretty much out there for most people. I know Superflex is getting more popular, but not quite that popular yet. This is not a great division when it comes to quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins is ranked lower than he has been in some time, for good reason. Coming off the Achilles injury, is older. We're not exactly sure how he's going to react to that situation. Right now, his ADP is at QB 17. We're all about there or even a little bit lower. I got him at 18, Chase 19, and Chris to top it off at 20. So, Chris, are you just a little bit more concerned about Cousins' age with the Achilles injury? Is that why you have him down as a lower end QB2?
I think there's a lot of transition that has to happen. Look, I'm excited for this offense in general, and being free from Arthur Smith, I think, is going to be wonders for this offense. But Darnold, when he's still your receiver too, Kyle Pitts still to show you he's going to be something extra. Drake London, we all been waiting him to be a superstar, but isn't quite there yet. So there's a lot of ifs. A guy who's coming off a major injury, offensive line that wasn't really good last year. People kind of forgetting about how bad the offensive line played last year. It's all back. People were excited about that, but didn't play so well pass protection wise. So a lot of things I'm kind of concerned about Kirk Cousins, and a lot of the quarterbacks who were hurt last year got banged up, who are healthier this year in situations I like them a little bit more better and trust them a little bit more in.
I mean, it's all fair, right, Chase? I mean, he's 36 years old. It is an Achilles thing. Chris, the offensive line thing, I think we're going to get a big improvement with Arthur Smith gone from that, too. You talk about a guy who put together a athletic type offensive line and completely used them in the exact wrong schemes that you need to use an athletic offensive line to do, which is very, very odd. But while we think there's improvements along there, maybe what are some of your things that you're looking at there, Chase?
Well, in Atlanta, I mean, for one, yeah, you've always got to be worried about coming off a major injury like an Achilles. But for the nice thing about it is that Kirk Cousins isn't like a big runner kind of thing. We don't have to worry about that so much. But with that offensive line, I think some of what you have to think about too last year for their performance, I guess you should say, they didn't have a whole hell of a lot going behind them with Desmond Ridder at quarterback and performing there either. So I think Kirk Cousins, he may be a little slow to start out the year, but I think that it really comes into its own later on in the season as it progresses. They do want to throw the ball more, which bodes well for Kirk Cousins and any counting stats and for the receivers there. So I like Cousins as a quarterback 2 bet, but I don't want to go too much higher on him right now until we see how he comes out of this injury.
And Dan, don't forget, he always has that stretch where he's just terrible for Kirk Cousins, 3 to 4 weeks where you're just like, what in the hell's going on? And then he bounces back.
Yeah, and Chris, to that point, you're right. That has been a historical trend for the most part throughout his career, and now he'll probably be on waiver wires in most leagues where you might be able to ride that out. And then if he gets going again, you'll be able to pick him up. And I think Kirk Cousins, first of all, his ADP at QB 18, which is where I have him ranked, I think is a testament again to how deep we think the quarterback position is, and the fact that you might have a guy like a Kirk Cousins that you could pick up off the waiver wire if need be. I mean, this is still a guy who's been a top 12 quarterback since 2020, every single year. That's where he would finish. Last year was, they kind of remember the Dak situation. Last year, man, he was on pace to have his best year ever.
Yes.
He was 7 before he got injured last year, with not showing any drop off with age. And this is yes, there's some adjustments here. It's not Kevin O'Connell, but it's the same type of offense. Yes, Chris, to your point, no, technically Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts have not proven yet that they're elite talents. I think we all feel like they are, and just haven't been put in a position to show that. I would argue Pitts has shown that. I mean, he had 1,000 yards as a tight end as a rookie who hadn't done that since Ditka, still hasn't done that since Ditka. In a way, I think Kyle Pitts has shown us that he can be a superstar, and he's healthier this season by all accounts with the knee issue that was maybe more severe than people had realized going into the season last year. This is not an advocate for, I think Kirk Cousins should be drafted in your leagues, but should he be at the top of your waiver wire priority, especially if your plan is streaming quarterbacks, if your plan is taking shots on maybe these lower end quarterbacks you plan on waiting for? Yeah, I do think he can still finish in there because he does have the weapons and the system all around him, depending upon the injury. I don't think there's much else we need to talk about Kirk Cousins. Let's talk a little bit about Derek Carr. And Chase, just want to get your take. None of us are in love with Derek Carr, so I'm not going to try to make this into a whole debate situation because it's really not. But Chris and I have him at 23. You got him all the way down there at QB 27. So why do you just hate him so much?
I don't know that I hate him so much as I'm just not excited about Derek Carr, because by this point we know what Derek Carr is going to be fantasy wise. I mean, he's going to get you 15 points a week. Yay. 15 points a week from your quarterback position doesn't really, excite me all that much, but that is pretty much what he is going to be every single time that he goes out. He doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. Only had, I think, 3 games last year over 20 points in the fantasy position. Now, those 3 points came in, I think, the last 4 weeks of the season, which is perfect timing if you had Derek Carr. But if you had Derek Carr as your starting quarterback, were you really around at that point of the year? I'm not so sure. Listen, he offers literally no rushing upside, hasn't scored a rushing touchdown in I think the last 3 seasons. They've got a terrible offensive line. The Saints might end up being one of the worst offensive lines, one of the bottom 3 or 4 offensive lines in the game. He's got a declining Alvin Kamara that we'll talk about later on. Juwan Johnson's injury, now whether he comes back or not, but either way, that hurts that passing attack. He does have the new offense with Clint Kubiak coming in, and I think that could help him a little bit. But at this point, Derek Carr is just who he is as a quarterback, so you're going to get 15 points a week, and I'm not as excited about him as I am about a lot of other people. So I've got him way down at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get to the fantasy standpoint of Derek Carr. What I am going to say is this, and I think it's kind of reflective in your ranking and what I think the narrative is turned to be. I do think Derek Carr is better than a bottom third quarterback in the league as a starter. And even like you said, 15 points a game, that's still QB 22. That's typically where that is. That's where we have him ranked at, Chris and I. This is not about Derek Carr being on your fantasy football teams. I do think Kubiak is a good fit with his scheme to get the most out of Carr. Now, the best we've ever seen out of Carr was QB 13, right? So, right. But what I need best out of Carr is what it might do for some of the other guys that we're going to talk about a little bit later. The ultimate tease there. One of these other guys, Baker Mayfield, yes, admittedly, I'm not a fan of. And you could tell me to your blue in the face that, yeah, he finished as the QB 10 last season. Let's put context to that. Let's call it for what it is. He was a QB 19 on a week in, week out basis. If you were starting Baker Mayfield, as great as his year was, as a career year as it was for Baker Mayfield, he was still not a fantasy football asset week in, week out at the QB 19 on a fantasy points per game basis. And I am not, Liam Cohen, I know, comes from a similar-ish system. He has a lot to prove as a play caller. There's been some questions about him. Did he do the best job when he was in Kentucky as well? So we have some issues around that. And I just don't see there not being a regression where Mayfield, who I know what type of quarterback he is, I know a less than average guy. And now you're going to tell me he's going to maintain the numbers that he did from last season, losing Dave Canales this past year. I'm not buying it. I think we're going to see Baker kind of come back down to where he was. So I have him ranked at 25, and that's also going to come into play, I think, with some of the other guys that we're going to talk about. Chris, here's my question to you. Is Bryce Young even a start-worthy quarterback? Maybe not just at fantasy football. Let's have a little fun with this discussion. Open it up for the NFL.
Well, fantasy-wise, I think that if you're starting Bryce Young, you're only starting him in a super flex and you're in a dynasty league and you're a rebuilding team. Now, having said that, as a standard redraft league team, I think he's absolutely not a guy that you have on your board for redraft leagues right now. I mean, talking about Derek Carr, talking about Kirk Cousins, talking about Baker Mayfield, all guys who have higher ceilings, all guys who have systems might be changing a little bit, but having shown you more success or immediately have better weapons in place is a big thing, I think. So I think Bryce Young can maybe be a starter quarterback because that's a hard question, Dan. I mean, there's some guys who I just don't really love in the league necessarily, but he reminds me a lot of Kenny Pickett. So I think if you're a Kenny Pickett fan and you think Kenny Pickett can play in the league, then maybe you think he's still a chance. I don't think Kenny Pickett can play in the league. I think Kenny Pickett shows you what he could do in Pittsburgh already. I think his career should probably be over. Bryce Young, I think, is going down the same road. But in Bryce Young's defense, I think Carolina has done a stupid, dumb job of putting talent around him. And I hear a lot of pundits, patting themselves on the back this offseason about how what Carolina did, the offensive line and the weapons they have in place and how it's upgraded. I heard the same shit last year. And look how it happened.
Where?
So,
did I hear you correct?
I'm not hearing you at all.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not hearing you right now. But I'm agreeing. I think where Dan's going with this, Chris, is: are you saying that they did not improve this offseason from what he had available to him last season?
I think Deontay Johnson is an improvement, but Adam Thielen, what you're going to get out of Deontay Johnson this year, probably you got out of Adam Thielen last year. Okay, so I think when it looks at what you're transitioning wise, what else are you going to get from the rest of the guys? Jonathan Mingo, Xavier Leggett. I think they're the same guy. We have to wait to see what happens exactly like it. But I already watched Jonathan Mingo everybody's be surprised that he can't run routes and he doesn't get open. Surprise! Well, I wasn't. So then you go get a guy who doesn't get open again, does the same thing. Then you're going to have a tight end, Sanders, who isn't that great, and get outplayed by Ian Thomas right now in OTAs. You have 400 running backs with an offensive line that doesn't really, your best running blocker is your tackle who can't pass protect. So I just don't think Bryce Young, all $100 million spent in the guards for Robert Hunt, who had one decent year last year, and a guy, that Seattle was looking to get rid of, from Damian Lewis, that they were happy to get rid of. So you paid him, $15, $16 million a season. They did that with Austin Corber 2 years ago, and how'd that work out? So I think this is the same thing. I think this is a repeat all over again. And I feel like I feel bad in a sense for Bryce Young, where I want to be just pound my chest and say, I told you everybody so. But right now, Dan, I still I try to give people chances.
What about Jonathan Brooks? What about Tavian Sanders? There's improvements from that standpoint as well. Deontay Johnson was not the only weapon they added this year. I don't disagree with you in the sense that Robert Hunt was an over.
Brooks came off an injury. You had Miles Sanders come in last year. What's the difference between what you're expecting out of Miles Sanders getting last year, what you think you're going to get for Brooks this year? And then I do think that talent-wise,
Miles Sanders sucked. Chuba Hubbard was not.
But I'm saying going into last year, when Carolina signed Miles Sanders, people were like, Miles Sanders could do a little bit like we did in Philadelphia. What do you think you're going to get out of James Brooks is going to be so much different? That's going to be so much more, better on.
I think I'm getting a more complete back who is more explosive and has better vision than Chuba Hubbard or Miles Sanders or anything they had on the team.
Hasn't practiced at all, right?
And even if it's not till, and we're going to get into Brooks a little bit later, I don't know if there hasn't been practices yet. There's been mini camp. No, he didn't play. He didn't practice.
He's been running around in underwear.
Practice haven't even been happening yet. But the point I was going to get to was, even if it's more over the second half of the season, then you're still going to get an improvement over where you're going to get John, even if that's when he's going to go, even if that's when he's going to start to get going. And Jatavian Sanders, yes, he's a rookie tight end, but this is still a better pass catching, more athletic tight end.
I thought Chuba Hubbard was
Bryce Young.
I was going to say real quick, I thought
Chuba an NFL caliber.
I was just saying real quick, Dan, I thought Chuba Hubbard did pretty good the second half of the season last year. I wonder what Brooks is going to bring better than they got last year from the running backs that they got.
Because he is better. He is a more talented, more complete, more all-around back. Chuba Hubbard did well for himself, relatively speaking, to him last season. But this was never an all-around back. This was never a guy who had great vision. This is a guy who was expected to be a compliment back and nothing more. Jonathan Brooks has a 3-down skill set. All right. Now, where he is exactly the injury, we'll have to see. My point more being adding Jonathan Brooks to this room, even if it's just to add competition, competent competition, is better than what they had last season. Jatavian Sanders is better than what they had last season. Robert Hunt is better than what they had last season. Deontay Johnson, even if your production-wise is similar to Adam Thielen, is better than what Adam Thielen was last season. I don't love Xavier Legette. No, I'm with you on that 100%. Like I was going to say, I don't think Bryce Young is an NFL starting caliber quarterback. But I think they've put enough around it to say, hey, if you don't improve, then maybe they need to move on from that number 1 pick sooner rather than later.
Now, Bryce Young was not good last year, but we also have to remember that teams are not in position to get the number 1 overall quarterback without sucking on a ton of other levels as well. They were not a good team last year, and I don't think it's all on Bryce Young. I think the jury has to be out yet on whether he can actually be a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. Baker Mayfield, for all that you don't love him or whatever else, I think has proven he can start in this league and play and be fine. Is he playing up to number 1 overall?
If he
standards?
has great
No.
talent around him, I think that's the key thing. That's what I'm trying to harp on. Look, if you're Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Bryce Young within Carolina, then you'd be listening to a different story from me right now. That's not what he's working with.
No, it's not what he's working with yet. But I think the jury is out on him in terms of being a starting caliber quarterback. I don't want him in fantasy unless he's my third on the depth chart in a dynasty superflex league or something. But I think the jury's still out on him on whether he can actually play in this league or not.
I'm surprised. I was trying to throw him a bone because I'm not a Bryce Young fan. I was trying to throw Bryce Young a bone, Dan, where I think that the jury still should be out in the sense where I don't think what they're putting around is improvement. You guys can tell me everything you want to see. We'll see at the end of this year if it's improvement. But I've seen Carolina make very similar moves. And I also listened to how Frank Reich was a good coach last year, offensive coordinator. And I argued very adamantly that he was not, and it was going to blow up. And then it blew up. So I think this David Canales is a better fit, is a better coach. They have better talent in the sense around him. But is it going to translate to Bryce Young going to be able to show what he has? I think Bryce Young, if he's going to be an NFL quarterback, has to be a point guard quarterback. Similar to what we saw with Geno Smith, head of Baker Mayfield. Those guys have a similar coaching staff. The playmakers around you, to me, this is a difference.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I know majority out there, they're going to say that the jury should be out still on Bryce Young after a season. And technically speaking, yes, you shouldn't say definitively one player is a bust or not after a year. I'm going to say it, though. He's a bust. I don't need to see more. It was, yes, Chase, it was bad last year. It was historically bad. Yeah, no, you can't put every little thing on Bryce Young. No, the guy was, just from a fantasy standpoint, was quarterback 43 on a points per game basis.
Well, he scored fewer than 10 points per game. I don't disagree there.
One thing you will absolutely get 100%, I have no doubt in my mind, is he showed you last year, which we've all agreed on MD's Fantasy Football Show last year before we transitioned to our new format, that we did not want Bryce Young as our number 1 quarterback on our boards. And I think we showed that Bryce Young is not the number 1 guy. That was clear as day last year. That I think we know that we can definitely definitively put a nail in the coffin on that one.
Yeah, 100%. It's just I'm going to say it. I think there's too many people out there who are afraid to be wrong and not just look with their own eyes of what you see on the field. I mean, how many conversations do we have to have? Chris, you brought up Kenny Pickett, how Kenny Pickett was going to be better because he was in the second year in X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, why? Just is in his second year of his season does not mean he automatically, his second year in his career, does not mean he automatically improves. When you just see a guy who can't play, he can't play. There's nothing about Bryce Young that you can point to and say, this gives me hope. He wasn't accurate. He doesn't have a good arm. He doesn't have mobility. He doesn't even have the right size. So I don't understand the argument why we're even trying to have a jury on this debate. I just wanted to get that out there so all the Carolina fans and all the Bryce Young lovers can hate me later on social media at Dan Mater FF. I'm not afraid to tweet me.